Let's go ahead and turn in our Bibles to the 31st Proverb, Proverbs 31, as we close out the study that we've had. And quite a bit in these 31 verses of chapter 31, so I want to just go ahead and dive right in if we can. It says, the words of King Lemuel, the utterance which his mother taught him. Now, just as we saw last week with King Agura, there's no reference in the Bible to anybody named Lemuel. And that's led a lot of commentators to speculate who possibly this could be speaking about. And the name Lemuel in the Hebrew is the... Whoa, where did we go? Oh, yeah, I'm pushing the right button, aren't I? No? Okay, let's try going backwards, see what happens. Nothing. There it is. Okay, yeah, David. Lemuel. The name Lemuel means from God. And, some believe that very possibly this could be speaking of Solomon. That's kind of my leaning as well, that it may have been even a pet name for him given to him by his mother, Bathsheba. According to the New Unger's Bible Dictionary, we'll see if this works this time. No, it doesn't. Quicker. Let me turn it off and turn it back on again. See how that works. What's that? Yeah, but I didn't do that. They did. Okay. The New Unger's Bible Dictionary says, a person of whom nothing is known except that to him the admonitory apothegms or apothegms, something like that. It's a $20 Bible guide, which means a rebuke of Proverbs where 31 verses 2 to 9, where it's addressed by his mother. The rabbinical commentators identify Lemuel with Samuel or Solomon, which seems the most likely conjecture. Others, such as Grotius, see the epithet to Hezekiah, not real sure what his reasoning for that is, while others, such as Gesenius, who was a great Hebrew scholar, believe that it refers to some neighboring petty Arabian prince. And again, I don't know what his thought in that is. The word utterance here in verse 1 is the... it's not going to... Maybe try unplugging it and plugging it back in and see what that does. I'm pushing the right button. I know I am. The word utterance means Massa in Hebrew, and that was a son of Ishmael from Genesis chapter 35. Some believe that this may have been kind of a clan, dynastic name of some sort, that not really referring to an utterance, but just referring to a family line. And when it says that his mother taught, the words which his mother taught, of course, that would, if this is Solomon, then that would be his mother, Bathsheba. Is that possible, that these verses were actually words that she had taught to her son? And it starts off, it says, what, my son? If you got one Bible says, oh, my son, which is probably a better rendering of it. What, my son, and what? Son of my womb, and what? Son of my vows? Do not give your strength to women, nor your ways to that which destroys kings. Don't be ruled by our passions, is basically what she is saying. And then she's going to go into telling him what exactly she's talking about. It's not for kings, O Lemuel, it's not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes intoxicating drink, lest they drink and forget the law and pervert the justice of all the afflicted. We covered this pretty much, this idea of Christians drinking alcohol, back in chapter 23. So if you'd like to know more of, if you're interested in what my views on it are, you could go back and check that out. But I think what Bathsheba, or whoever the mother is to whomever her son is, she's essentially saying drinking is fine for those that don't care about their example or their influence or their impact. So if you don't care about any of those things, she said it's not fitting for you in your position to do that. But if you don't care about any of those things, then go ahead. Where she says it causes you to forget the law. The word law there is literally means inscription. It's the idea of something being carved in stone. Like they would, like we see the tablets of the Ten Commandments being carved in stone, and which is the way that they would write often in those days. And this actually is, the word is oftentimes used for some sort of a decree or an edict from the sovereign, something that is of a civil law kind of deal, as opposed to the Bible. And she's telling Solomon, her son, you go out and get drunk, and you're going to forget what you've passed as laws, and you'll be breaking your own laws that way. Give strong drink. I remember we had a friend, or not a friend, but there was this guy back in my hometown. He was just kind of this drunk that went around he was a professional going from church to church begging people, and he would go to churches, and he had this verse down pat. He could quote it all very accurately, and he knew it in the King James. And he would go up to people in the various churches and try to get them to buy him some food or pay for another night in a motel. And he would always use the scare tactic of, I'm just so down, I'm so bummed out, I'm just going to go commit suicide. If I have to sleep on the street tonight, I'm just going to kill myself. And then if by any chance you tried to didn't go along with him, if you didn't buy into his line, then he would start pulling and you call yourself a Christian sort of a deal. And it says in verse 7, let him drink and forget his poverty. And he says, I'm a poor man, so the reason why I drink is so I can forget my poverty and remember my misery no more. Well, basically what we'll just, for sake of argument, say this is Bathsheba, and we'll say that basically what she's saying, if you've given up hope and you are lost and full of despair, then go ahead and drink yourself to hell. That's I think an idea of what she's saying. Open your mouth for the speechless, in the cause of all who are appointed to die. Open your mouth, judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and the needy. Now it's unclear if verses 10 through 31, through the end of the chapter, where exactly her part in this, Lemuel's mother, end off. Most people think that she ends with verse 9. And starting with verse 10 is the passage. In fact, your Bible probably has a heading on it that says something like the virtuous woman. The whole chapter of the 31st chapter is kind of viewed as, in fact, we'll sometimes say about some woman, she's a Proverbs 31 woman. It's kind of like that's become an idiom for a woman, that she's a good wife and a good mother and industrious. We just say she's a Proverbs 31 woman. The rest of the chapter is an acrostic, which means each verse starts with a subsequent letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And before we begin, let me just say, because I know how easily, we're going to have probably four kinds of people here tonight. There's going to be the guy that thinks, boy, this sure does describe my wife. Or we're going to have the guy that says, boy, I wish my wife were here listening to this. Or we'll have the woman that's saying, boy, this is such an encouragement to have these sort of things that I can ascribe to. Or the woman that's going to say, who is this gal? I've never heard of her before, and become very discouraged and disillusioned because the standard is so lofty. Let me just say at the beginning that I don't think this is actually describing a real person. This is kind of like the Barbie doll of the spiritual world. She just her attributes are really this is like a goal or a standard or something that I think the Lord puts before us. And it says, who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies. And the word virtuous here is the word chayel. We saw it earlier, and it means it's actually a masculine noun that it's translated throughout the Old Testament as the man of valor. In Judges chapter 6, when the angel of the Lord stands before Gideon and calls him and says, the angel of the Lord appeared to him, verse 12, and said to him, the Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor. And the word valor there is the word chayel. It's also back in this chapter, if you go back up to verse 3, where it says, and do not give your strength to women, that's the same word. And it's translated army, host, forced, strength, as we see in verse 3, and power. The virtuous woman. And most of us, I'm sure, are familiar with this chapter, and we know what it says about them and about who this virtuous woman is and what her attributes and characteristics are. And as I said, there's probably many women that will read this chapter and just think, man, there is no way I could ever attain to all of this. And so many become discouraged, and we think, why even try? Joe Focht, I was listening to him today, and he had a very interesting comment, pastor at Calvary Chapel, Philadelphia. He says, why is the virtuous woman so hard to find? And he paused, and he even repeated the question. He says, why is a virtuous woman so hard to find? And he says, because she is so seldom sought. The guys don't look for a virtuous woman until they're ready to settle down. While they're sowing their oats, they want to see some. They are looking for a woman who is not virtuous in any stretch, and because of that, because that's not what we want, and the guys kind of push and shove, and they're the men in business. They're the men that control the media and so many things. It's men that are in charge, and our whole society as a whole begins to shift away from thinking that a virtuous woman is a woman of virtue. And so the women wanting to be wanted and wanting to be accepted in the culture and society, they are turning away from it as well. Whereas if we, the men who have been given the mantle of leadership by the Lord, actually sowed this and sought this and nurtured this kind of an aspect, maybe virtuous women wouldn't be so rare today. We live in a culture that is sold on the non-virtual character. And I'm not solely talking about the culture of the world. I'm talking about even those of us within the church oftentimes. And, the only husband, if the husbands are here tonight or watching or listening to this at any time, and you are the only husband, I would say, who is ever worthy of holding this standard up before their spouse is the one who has nailed that standard that Jesus gives him in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25, where he says, husbands, love your wives in the same way that Christ loved the church. And so until you've done that, until you have sacrificed and given yourself in the way that Jesus has sacrificed and given his way for us, we can't expect this kind of high standard that is given here in our spouses. He says, verse 11, the heart of her husband safely trusts her so that he will have no lack of gain. Now, the husband is mentioned 3 times in the passage. Don't know if that's a lot or not very much. I don't know. It's just that that's what it is. He's mentioned 3 times. And I like what Isaiah writes in Isaiah 54, verse 5, where he says, for your maker is your husband. The Lord of hosts is his name. Your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel, and he is called the God of the whole earth. And so here as husbands, that is our standard. We have the Yahweh himself who shows us. This may be the quintessential wife given to us in chapter 31 of Proverbs, but the whole Bible gives us the quintessential husband of the Lord himself. It says that he trusts her. He safely trusts her. What does this mean that he safely trusts her? Well, obviously it would refer to fidelity. That would be part of it. I think we could see how that would fit in, but I think it's much broader than that. Just trust her that she can take his interest and that she would be a woman of discretion, and that she would represent him faithfully in the public arena, that she would be faithful. He trusts her. He safely trusts her with the finances. He doesn't have to worry about, oh no, she's got the credit card again and she's got that look in her eyes. That he could trust her in those sort of things. Just trusting that she would be faithful to promote his needs and would be a good representation of him. The Living Bible, I think, does a good job of summarizing this, where it says her husband can trust her and she will richly satisfy his needs. I like that. Verse 12 says, she does him good and not evil all the days of her life. What this means is that not only is she faithful to support and faithful to encourage and faithful to be that Eitzer that it says in Genesis chapter 2, where God says, I will make a completer for him. I will make a helper for him. Not only is this Proverbs 31 woman one who will be that, but she's also not going to be the one that runs him down all the time, just putting him down, whether it's privately or publicly, whether it's something that he's aware of or something that he's not aware of. Many of you have heard me say many, many times that I am just faithfully confident that you've never heard my wife say anything negative about me. And I can say that in a very public way because she is somebody who I safely trust her not to do that. And to my knowledge, in 43 years, she hasn't. And if she has, somebody let me know. But I know that she hasn't. Um, because she's a woman that seeks to do me good and not evil. Um, Says she seeks wool and flax. Now, wool, those grow on animals. Wool's, you go to a sheep to get wool, but flax is something that grows out of the ground. And so she is adept in whether she's going down to the wool store, I guess that would be Woolworths, or she's going down to the flax store to buy some flax, or whether she's raising the sheep and growing the flax. She's busy about that, and says she willingly works with her hands. The word willingly here in Hebrew means she takes pleasure in it. She takes delight. She is just joyously going out and tending to these needs of the wool and the flax would be used for family and for clothing and that sort of thing. And so she joyously takes on those chores. She's like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. How many remember green stamps? Okay, a couple of you. More than I expected, actually. Green stamps were these things that you would get at the stores, and they all kind of competed against one another as to they would give like triple stamps or double stamps or something, and whoever gave the most green stamps, then you'd take the stamps, you put them in a book, and then when you filled the book up, you could buy stuff with it. You could redeem the stamps. She was a lady that saved her green stamps. She was a lady that looked at all of the circulars. They would come in the mail, and she'd take them the center section out of the Sunday paper, and she would look, oh boy, beef is on sale at this store, and then she would write that down, and she clipped coupons, and she would go to the stores and the places where she would get the best value for her dollar. And that's the merchant ships. This was you couldn't go. The idea of some sort of store that would have a department store or some sort of a Walmart or Target type of thing where you could buy food and tires and clothing at the same place. They didn't have nothing like that. You had to rely on the merchant ships. They were the ones that brought the variety into your life. And so she was hip to the merchant ships. And she says, she also arises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and a portion for her maidservants. She considers a field and buys it. Maybe she was involved in some kind of real estate or something, but she'd wake up early in the morning, she'd go out and she looked at this field, and she goes, oh, this would be a good deal. And so she purchases it, and then from her profits, she plants a vineyard. She makes a good deal. She wheels and deals and comes up with enough money that she can actually take this property that she bought and plant a vineyard in it. And she doesn't punch a time clock. She doesn't take a day off. Guys, we get our days off, and we come home and we work hard all day long. And so, I worked hard all day long. And so now I want to just sit here and I'm going to, watch the football game and bring me a glass of iced tea if you don't mind. And then, of course, on Saturday, it's Junior's turn to mow the grass. And so you got all day football on Saturday. But when does the mom take the day off? Could you imagine a mom telling little Johnny, well, leave me a voicemail. Now, Mommy, my head hurts. What do I do? Well, leave me a voicemail. Just call my cell phone, leave a voicemail, and I'll get back with you tomorrow. I'm off today. She doesn't do that. The NLT says she gets up before dawn to prepare breakfast for her household and plan the day's work for her servant girls. And you got to understand that in those days, getting up before dawn and preparing breakfast did not mean opening up a can of oatmeal, dropping in a bowl, filling it with water, and then throwing it in the microwave for 60 seconds. It would take hours to prepare the breakfast. And so she would have to get up way before dawn, and she would do that joyously and delightfully. Today, many women would feel like if you were to ask the average woman today, what do you do? And if one of them just happened to be, I don't like the word housework. I heard somebody say many years ago, you're not married to your house, and so I prefer the term homemaker. And if a woman would answer that question, what do you do? And she would say, well, I'm a homemaker. Very few women can, in our culture, society today, will say that proudly. It's almost like this, well, I'm a homemaker, but I really got all of these duties, and I work really hard, and I don't sit around and watch TV. It's almost like you have to explain yourself if you admit that you're a homemaker. And yet there was a survey done not long ago where they interviewed a bunch of women who were not, and 88% of them said that they wish they were. They would rather be homemakers if they had the opportunity. I don't know if you remember Timothy Leary or not, but he was a guy from the 60s, and probably this is the only time I've ever quoted him in a Bible study. But he said this. He said, "Women who seek to be equal with men lack ambition." And while he might have been off in every other aspect of his life, he sure got that one right. Women who want to try to be equal with men are just shortchanging themselves. And if you've gone to Calvary Chapel for any length of time, you've heard me quote, anytime I get on this subject, I love to quote Donald Gray Barnhouse when he said, "Women are superior to men at being women." And this whole women's lib sort of thing that women have to be liberated from being women is just kind of, it's incredulous to me. The home front comes first, and the virtuous woman recognizes that and sets herself to that. She girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. I can imagine the guy when he was about to prepare his proposal to her, when he was going up to her asking her if she'd like to get married. He goes, "She has good teeth, broad hips. Yes, I take her." She's got she's kind of ripped, and she girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. She pumps iron. She perceives that her merchandise is good, and her lamp does not go out by night. So not only does she arise very early in the morning, but she also doesn't clock out at night. The Good News Bible doesn't look like I got that in here, but the Good News Bible says she knows the value of everything she makes and works late into the night. That's a pretty good rendering of it. She stretches out her hands to the distaff. This would be, she does the weaving. She couldn't, today we don't even go down to Joann Fabrics and buy a yard of material to make some clothes. In those days, they didn't even have a Joann Fabrics. They would have to actually knit their clothing or spin it on first they had to spin the thread, and then they'd have to weave the thread, and then they'd have to sew what they wove. And she stretches out her hand to the distaff, and her hand holds the spindle. She extends, not only does she take care of her family, but check this out in verse 20, it says, "And she extends her hand to the poor. Yes, she reaches out her hands to the needy." She's not afraid of the snow for her household. And I think I got these slides out of order here, but let me... oh, there's the good news quote. Yeah, here it is. Sherry and I were watching this nature show, BBC nature show. They show those on Netflix all the time, and we've kind of been binge watching these nature shows. And there was this story about where it says that she is not afraid of the snow for her household. This is a story about the Inuit women that are in the Canadian Arctic. This is above the Arctic Circle. And these gals got up very early before, sunrise is in the wintertime is like there's not one, but they would get up very early in the morning. And it was a story about these two sisters and their 13-year-old granddaughter. This is Minnie on let's see, right there, that's Minnie, and this is her granddaughter. And they got on their snowmobile and rode for several hours to get to this place. They were 10 miles offshore. They went past the edge of the land for 10 miles, and they were over this ice, but it's what they call sea ice. It's the ice that forms over the ocean. And they had to wait for a low tide, and they had this tide that would happen a few times a year. The tide would drop like 30, 40 meters. And so they would go in, they would have to dig a hole. That she would find the place, she knew exactly where it was, and she would dig a hole, and it would be a cave that they would dig down into this place, and then they would crawl down in there during low tide, And they had like 45 minutes to do this whole thing, dig the hole, fall down in there, and they would take a 5-gallon bucket and fill it full of mussels, and then go back, and that's how they would have mussels to eat during the wintertime when it was too cold to go seal hunting, I guess. I don't know. But the tide would start coming back while they're down under there. And when it comes back, they said it would come back very quickly. And they had just minutes to get out of this cave. And sometimes the hole was only about this wide. They had a hard time fitting through it. And it was really pretty amazing, the courage that these gals had to just, and I don't even like clams, and they would do all of that just to get clams so that they could have food for the winter. That's a virtuous woman. That's a woman who's not afraid of snow for her household. Her household is clothed with scarlet. The Old King James has a footnote on this where it says clothed with double garments. And that's probably the idea behind here. It's kind of a textual thing between the manuscripts, between the ones that are based on the Greek and those that are and Latin, and those that are based on the Hebrew. But the NLT says it this way: she has no fear of winter for her household, for everyone has warm clothes. And I think that's what the author, what Lemuel is saying to here. She has no fear of the snow because she knows that her family is going to be nice and toasty all winter long. She makes tapestry for herself, and her clothing is fine linen and purple. This isn't a vanity thing. She's not vain, trying to, spend hours in front of the mirror trying to make sure she's got all the makeup put on just right. I mean, she just wants to look her best for her family, for her husband, and so she sews her own clothes and she puts on these good clothes just so she looks best. I love this in verse 23. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. You know what sitting in the gates was in those days. I mean, this would be where the lawmakers, where the judges, where the people would go to do their ruling. This was the civil leaders would go, and they would sit in the gates. The gates were more than just simply an opening in the wall. Sometimes the wall was very several feet thick at this point, and they would have rooms and offices, and the men would go there and sit in the gates while they took care of the affairs of the community during that day. And it says her husband is made, he is known in the gates. Somebody would say, oh, you know what? That's Senator Smith over there. She's Mrs. Smith's, or he's Mrs. Smith's husband. He wasn't known for being a man sitting in the gates. He was a man sitting in the gates because he was known for being her husband. E.D. Hill, I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to listen to him. He died back in 2003. Just a tremendously powerful preacher of the word. Had this kind of a raspy, booming voice, and I loved to used to listen to Pastor Hill teach. And his wife died back in the 90s, and he was speaking. He was actually he officiated her funeral. He's given her epitaph at her funeral, and her name was Jane. And he was talking about her in the early days of his ministry. He had at one point the largest African American church in America. There in Mount Zion Church in Los Angeles. And in the early days of his ministry, when he first started off in the late 50s, and things were pretty tight, and they barely were able to make ends meet. And he had this opportunity to invest in a gas station. And he went home and he was talking to Jane about it. And she said, "Oh, honey, I think that's too risky." And he goes, no, I've crunched the numbers and I've done all this. And I've been praying about this and I really feel the Lord's in it. And she goes, I don't know. It just doesn't sound like a good idea to me. Well, Reverend Hill went ahead and did it anyway. And of course, we can guess what the outcome of it was. The day came when it went bust and they had to close the doors, and he just ended up losing all the money that he invested in it. And he was coming home that night with his tail between his legs, and he was walking in just fully expecting Jane to be there at the door, all ready with her "I told you so" speech. And he came in, and she greeted him at the door, and she welcomed him, and she had him sit down, and she just, had him fixed him a nice dinner and everything. And after several minutes had gone by, he said to her, "I really expected you to say 'I told you so.' How come you're treating me so nice?" And she goes, "Well, honey, when I first heard about what was happening today, I sat down with a piece of paper. And you don't drink and you don't smoke. And so I sat down and I added up how much money we would have spent if you did. And since you don't, since you were following what you thought was God's will in investing in this gas station, I feel like you've saved us a lot of money by being a man of God than what you would have done if you hadn't have been. And he told another story about one time he came home and Jane had met him at the door, and she was all made up and had her hair and had on a nice dress, and there was a really nice dinner spread out on the table with candlelights, and she greeted him at the door, and it was like, "Hi there, honey," and she brought him in, and he was thinking, "Boy, am I glad I came home from work early today." And so he says, "Look, let me go in the bathroom and wash up." And so he went in the bathroom, he flipped on the light, and it didn't come on. And so he came out and asked her what happened. She goes, "Well, we didn't have money to pay the electric bill, and so they turned off the power today. And I was going to tell you, but I know what a hard day you've had at the church all day long, and so I was going to wait and just kind of let you have a nice evening and a nice meal and everything before I did." Jane Hill was a virtuous woman. Let me back up to this. Well, I'll just read this one that I was reading. It's got out of this is something I shared on a Mother's Day several years ago, and I was kind of looking around today, and I found it again. I thought it would be very appropriate for this setting. "You're not my mother," was the retort after I had just become aware that the reason my wife had become so cruel toward me all evening was because Mother's Day had come and gone without so much as a well-wishing for her on this most auspicious day. "You're not my mother." I had to think long and hard about that statement. And true enough, for my own mother had gone on to be with the Lord some time before. So I guess if you want some perfume or something, you're just going to have to hope that the kids haven't spent all their money, their allowance on video games. But then that utterance came back to me and haunted me. "You're not my mother." Let's see if okay, you got that? Yeah. Was that really true? Thanks. Okay. You never changed my dirty diaper or kissed a boo-boo or checked the closet for monsters or read me nighttime stories. You never told Larry White to go home when he was teasing me in front of Adrian Wiegand. You weren't the one who sewed me a Tarzan outfit when I was 7 and made me the envy of Litchfield, Porter, and 24th Street. You never held me in your arms and reassured me over the screams of a tornado siren that everything was going to be okay. In fact, truth be known, it's me that does that for you. But you are the one who nursed me when I had the flu, and you called all the ladies in the church to pray for me. And it was you who scrimped and sacrificed with the household budget to surprise me with that shirt that you knew I wanted. And while you never chased any bullies away from our house, it was you who, when the world was ready to chew me up and spit me out, put your arms around me and looked straight into my eyes and made me believe that I could overcome any bully the world would throw at me. Oh, and as for your kisses, whoa, baby, boo-boos, look out. You believed in me to the point that I can too. You've loved me and taught me that it's okay to love and risk being hurt. You've always been there. You've taught me how to esteem others above myself. And in addition to this, you've given me the privilege of watching you read the stories, kiss the boo-boos, and chase the monsters with our children. And for that, Mom, I'm truly grateful. May this day be a blessing to you as you have been a blessing to your family. Happy Mother's Day. That's a virtuous woman. She makes garments and sells them. She supplies sashes for the merchants. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. You know, her identity was not in what she wore. Her identity was the strength and honor that came in her being and in the way she carried herself. New International Version says it this way: she is clothed with strength and dignity, and she can laugh at the days to come. Did I miss that one too? Oh yeah, got a good job. She is clothed with strength and dignity, and she can laugh at the days to come. The Living Bible says she is a woman of strength and dignity and has no fear of old age. That's where her character shines. That's where her strength and honor come from. Proverbs or Psalms, 92 verses 14 and 15 says, "They still bear fruit in old age, and they shall be refreshing and flourishing to declare that the Lord is upright." She opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. There's no gossip. There's no slander. There's no idle talk. No back talk. She watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Watches over the ways of her household. She's hip to what's up. She knows what's going on with her kids. She knows where she's just in tune with what's happening. Her children, it says in verse 28, rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. And check out verse 29. This is kind of interesting to me. In verse 29, it shifts. You notice it's in quotes. All of the modern English versions, except the ESV, I think, put it in quotes. But check this out. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. It changes from third person, it changes to second person. It's actually specifically addressing this mother from those who know her the best, from the children and the husband. I don't know if this is speaking of the husband or the children that are saying this to her, or if it's the Lord, as he just decided to interrupt the narrative right now and put in his 2 cents. John Killinger wrote a book back in the 80s called Love, Wonder, and Praise. And check this out. I believe in Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God, who was born of the promise to a virgin named Mary. I believe in the love Mary gave her son that caused her to follow him in his ministry and stand by his cross as he died. I believe in the love of all mothers and its importance in the lives of the children they bear. It is stronger than steel, softer than down, and more resilient than a green sapling on a hillside. It closes wounds, melts disappointment, and enables the weakest child to stand tall and straight in the fields of adversity. I believe that this love, even at its best, is only a shadow of the love of God, a dark reflection of all that we can expect of him, both in this life and the next. And I believe that one of the most beautiful sights in the world is a mother who lets this greater love flow through her to her child, blessing the world with the tenderness of her touch and the tears of her joy. Verse 30 says, charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. I don't think there's anything more beautiful than a woman who fears the Lord. I don't care what her shape is. I don't care what her size. I don't care what her hair color is or what kind of makeup or complexion she has. There's nothing more beautiful than a woman who fears the Lord. There was another book back in the 80s written by a guy named Ben Patterson in The Grand Essentials. And let me share this with you. I have a theory about old age, he writes. I believe that when life has whittled us down, when the joints have failed and the skin has wrinkled and capillaries have clogged and hardened, that what is left of us will be what we were all along in our essence. Exhibit A is a distant uncle. All his life, he did nothing but find new ways to get rich. He spent his senescence, which is the condition of aging, of getting old, deteriorating from age. He spent his senescence very comfortably, drooling and babbling constantly about the money he had made. When life whittled him down to his essence, all there was left was raw greed. And this is what he cultivated in 1,000 little ways over a lifetime. Exhibit B is my wife's grandmother. When she died in her mid-80s, she had already been senile for several years. What did this lady talk about? The best example I can think of is when we asked her to pray for dinner, and she would reach out and hold the hands of those sitting beside her. A broad, beatific smile would spread across her face, and her dim eyes would fill with tears as she looked up to heaven, and her chin would quaver as she poured out her love to Jesus. That was Edna in a nutshell. She loved Jesus, and she loved people. She couldn't remember our names, but she couldn't keep her hands from patting us lovingly whenever we got near her. When life whittled her down to her essence, all that was left was love. Love for God and love for people. Give her, he says, as he closes it out, the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. I thank God for a virtuous wife. In fact, when we have our men's prayer that gathers on Saturday mornings, and just seems like probably at least half of all of the prayers that we have during that time is when we're praying for our spouses. And we just start off with, I just thank God for my wife and what a blessing she is to me, and then whatever that prayer need may be. And I'm so grateful to see the fruit of so much of what is going on in this chapter being portrayed, being worked out by the ladies in our church. And many of us do the proverb a day. It's been my maxim for a number of years. The proverb a day keeps the devil away. And a lot of people like to read. On the first day of the month they'll read Proverbs 1, and on the second day of the month they'll read Proverbs 2, and so on and so forth. And I really dig, right there in chapters 5 and stuff where it says rejoicing with the wife of your youth. I like that part of it. But how fitting it is that we come to, because there's not 31 days in most months, and yet this is one of them, and how fitting it would be that on the 31st day of this month we found ourselves in the 31st proverb. And it ends as it began. If you remember, we talked about the fear of the Lord, and we looked at all of the different times where the phrase fear of the Lord is used, and we asked the question. We started off by asking the question, what is the fear of the Lord? And then as we, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and the fear of the Lord is to depart from evil. And when we put them all together, I said this is where we begin to understand exactly what the Bible means when it talks about the fear of the Lord. And we began by asking that question. It's like we end by God saying, here's an example. Here's what fear of the Lord looks like in this woman that has loved me and loved my people. Let's pray. God, I thank you for that plan that you had when you looked down at Adam and declared that it wasn't good that he would dwell alone, that there was something about him that needed fulfilling. And Lord, you decided then, or declared then, not that you decided, but you were going to make a helper that would be comparable for him. Someone that could fill in the valleys and maybe rub down the rough places. I thank you for the fulfillment that comes from a marriage that is dedicated to you and a relationship that puts you first. I thank you for the fruit that comes from the ladies that take that mantle as a personal possession and strive and desire above all things to be your women, your vessels, to be your instruments through whom you will not only work within their families, but throughout their lives and all of their throughout their community and their areas of involvement. I thank you for your word, Lord. I thank you for the time that we've had in Proverbs. I thank you for the great jewels and just even the little pithy takeaways that we can get from our time in Proverbs. But Lord, I just thank you for the great wisdom, not only that was given from Solomon, but Lord, that was imparted to him. And that we can learn from his wisdom and also learn from his folly, that we might walk in your fear. All these things we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Questions or comments?